In 2023, Africa's largest economy plans to spend 20.5 trillion naira. However, it projects that it will only be able to come up with 9.73 trillion naira organically from internally generated revenue. As things stand, the country is about 11 trillion naira short. With a debt crisis looming and Eurobond interest rates in the double digits, the country is keen to borrow as little as possible. To achieve this, the President, Muhammadu Buhari-led administration, is presenting the 2022 Finance Bill for legislative review and hopefully for approval. The bill proposes to amend 10 of Nigeria's laws. These are the Capital Gains Tax Act, the Companies Income Tax Act, the Customs Excise Tariff, among others, including the Consolation Act, the Federal Revenue Service Establishment Act, the Personal Income Tax, the Petroleum Profits Tax Act, Stamp Duties Act, the Value Added Tax Act, the Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Act, and the Public Procurement Act. In an appearance before the Senate Committee on Finance last week, Nigeria's Finance Minister Zainab Ahmed said the passage of the bill would help propel Nigeria towards a more favorable economic outlook. So this morning, Taiwo Oyedele, fiscal policy partner and Africa tax leader at PwC Nigeria, joins us now to assess the impact of the passage of this bill and if it would help the country rise above its struggling economic status. You're welcome, Taiwo. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me and compliments of this decision.
I wish you the same. Looking at the bill, the commencement date is tagged or pegged at January 1. Now, is this a clerical or a typo or typographical error? And does it mean that the Nigerian government is trying to backdate the amendment, looking at how they amended that bill starting from the year?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is one of the observations that many people have made about the finance bill, which is currently with the lawmakers. And it's extremely unusual. I think even during the military era, you rarely find governments, enacting a decree or a law like we have it under democratic rule and then backdating it because to a very large extent, many of the provisions of the law impose burdens on businesses and individuals, and you cannot comply retrospectively. It's impossible because January 2022 is gone and it's gone forever and things like that. So we're really hoping that this, was a typo and not government trying to play a fast one for whatever reasons. So we're still going to wait and see. We don't know what it is as of yet until the law has been enacted and signed after being passed by the National Assembly.
Well, the Nigerian government is actually hopeful that this bill will bring about economic transformation, most importantly because there is an 11 trillion naira hole that is needed to be filled in Nigeria's 2023 budget. So they are hoping that this bill will be able to plug those deficits. How well do you think these amendments will go in filling those holes?
Yeah, very good question. So I think, in terms of the broad objectives, government said they were trying to accomplish tax equity, there's climate change and green growth, there's incentive reform, investment in health, as well as growth and job creation. So these are very laudable objectives. But when you go down into the details of the bill, there's not a lot to give you the comfort that these objectives will be accomplished in a very big way. So if you take something like, tax equity, raising revenue, you see some amendment there that you don't know whether a lot of job has been done based on data. For example, government is saying that if you're a gas flaring company, your company's income tax rate will go up from the standard 30% to 50%. But the little I know about that sector is the fact that in all the major oil production assets, government is actually the senior shareholder, sometimes holding up to about 60%. And for you to flare out, you need a lot of investment, and government has not been contributing its own share of the investment. That is why we've had the gas flaring penalty for so many years, and it hasn't worked. So it would be then, therefore, unfair for the same government to turn around and punish the operators for not, flaring out doing gas playouts or capturing it for proper utilization. You also have taxation of cryptocurrency. So crypto, everybody knows that this year has been a bad year for cryptocurrency. And that is when government is introducing taxes on cryptocurrency. And in fact, also the central bank says, don't do crypto. Banks don't even help anybody to do it. Almost like, making it illegal as far as the CBN is concerned. So the question is, if you want to tax it, how do you get access to the information if you are not regulating the exchanges, the miners, and all the players within the system, right? So you also have, provisions such as telecommunication and other services government wants to impose excise duties. And I don't know of any country where you have excise duty on all services. So these, initiatives require, in my view, a lot more thought. They require evidence and data for analysis, and then to focus on a few things that are broad-based and will make bigger impact than just trying to make all sorts of amendments here and there.
Well, some people have said that this bill is a drastic measure at looking at how to plug all the deficits and, of course, address the issue of economic doldrums that the country is faced with. But then let's take a look at the formal and the informal sector, because when you consider the bill, you discover that it actually proposed increases on taxes for businesses in the formal sector. But then, of course, there's the informal sector that the IMF has said that it dwarfs the formal sector. So I'm looking at the bill or what the government has done so far. Has there been any sort of mobilization to look at this undertaxed sector of the Nigerian economy and see what revenue can be generated from there?
Yeah, no, I think, this is a very good question, a very important one. So every time, Nigerian politicians and many opinion, shapers will tell you about informal sector is large, is this and that. And I do not disagree, but I think when it comes to the tax strategy for the informal sector, I just think that we need to do it very differently from what we are doing currently. On one hand, you need to even redefine what's the informal sector in this technological age. In those days, without a lot of technology, in fact, before COVID-19, you had a lot of businesses that could operate under the radar without government knowing, without proper regulation, without any track, without any trail on the internet. Today is almost impossible. So you really have to be really micro, maybe selling akara by the roadside or boli or vulcanizer for you not to have any trace on the internet. So I think the size of the informal sector that government has no idea what they are doing has reduced significantly. Therefore, what policymakers need to do is to say, how do we first and foremost support these informal sector, micro, small, medium-sized companies, so that they can prosper? I always like to say that it's not sufficient for government to have the legal powers to impose and collect taxes. They need to earn the moral right to do so. So when you support them, you collect data. Government has to pay more attention to collecting data and information. How many of them are there? What are the challenges they are facing? What is their primary concern? How many of them survive beyond 2 or 3 years? Some of them need skills. Some of them need access to finance. So provide those things and support them so they can create employment, they can generate economic development and growth. And then you can talk about taxes. And in fact, I'll say when it comes to taxes of the informal sector, your focus as a government should not be on more than the top 5%, because the vast majority of the rest of the population are just hustling, trying to make ends meet. So in this finance bill, there isn't a lot, provision in that regard to try and cover and capture the informal sector. What you tend to find is more around government trying to take away some incentives, but also trying to introduce some new taxes, and at the same time trying to also introduce a little bit of relief like capital gains tax. Before in Nigeria, if you incur a capital loss on selling an asset, government says, well, that's your problem, you can deal with it. But when you make a gain, government will tax you, which is really not fair. So this bill now is proposing that if you have a loss, you can take it out from your gains before you pay tax on the balance. So that's a positive development. And also you have this conversation on excise duties, on non-alcoholic beverages, and there has been a lot of pushback from the industry. And I'm happy to know that government has listened and they're not going ahead with this anymore, because in that finance bill, there's no provision to increase the excise duty rate, because it would just be the wrong time to impose higher burden on businesses and industries that are struggling. Based on the last GDP result by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, National Bureau of Statistics, the manufacturing sector declined by almost 2%, and the food, beverage, and tobacco subsector declined twice as much, by almost 4%. So really, you don't want to place more burden on that sector that is labor intensive at a time when we have a lot of our people in poverty and unemployment is also rising.
All right. In your response, Taiwo, you talked about the reason for proper data and, of course, information capturing mechanism, so as to have a comprehensive data of the number of people in business, and that would help improve the stats and what needs to be done in areas that are needed. Economists are also saying that this would go a long way in preventing those who may want to evade tax payments from doing so, because we are aware that when tax rises, people and institutions will be looking at ways to evade tax and, of course, avoid paying what is due to them. So looking at these laws, would you say that these laws adequately deal with this trend in terms of tax evasion and avoidance?
I'll say not enough. By the way, people around the world, no matter which country you go to, even when they see taxpayers' money at work in developed countries, people want to not pay taxes. They find legitimate means, to the extent they can, to reduce or avoid paying taxes. So this is not, specific to Nigeria. What is peculiar to Nigeria is the fact that you find a lot of people, including people in leadership positions, including government agencies, leading the way in evading taxes. We saw even with the ongoing political season, as many of the politicians who want to vie for the highest office haven't paid taxes before. So that in itself makes it difficult for businesses and households and individuals to want to pay, when, one, you think that the people who are spending the money are not tax compliant. Two, whatever little you pay, they don't tend to spend it prudently, and there's very little transparency as to how government is spending the money. So it makes it even more difficult. What this government needs to do to be able to curb tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance, again, I'll go back to data. And some of us have been in conversation with policymakers on this, but there seems to be very little interest. Now, the reason why people pay taxes in those other countries, even though they are not also happy to pay, sometimes they don't want to pay, but they have to, is because they know the taxman knows what they are doing. And to that extent, if you don't pay, it's easy to find you out, and there'll be consequences, including penalties and even maybe jail terms. So government has to recognize that people can hide their income, but they can't hide how they spend it. So if you track people's spending, you track their investments, and you track also their, sometimes you find people who have significant savings, investments, and spending, whether it's using payment card, international travels, buying land, buying vehicles. All of these activities has one leg involving government one way or the other. Government needs to collect that intelligence and connect it to be able to know who has wealth and is not paying their fair share and go after them. That is the way to move the needle, in my view, from around 6% tax to GDP ratio where we are now, to something very decent around 15%, which is really almost like the minimum we need to be able to finance meaningful development for the country on a sustainable basis.
All right, thank you so much, Taiwo. Now, let's consider two types of fiscal policy, or let's call it a tax policy. We have the expansionary fiscal policy, which looks at galvanizing economic growth. It's all about, improving the economic indices. And we have the contractionary fiscal policy, which is sort of like an inhibitor when an economy is growing too fast, or like a checkmate, so to speak. Now, looking at this bill, it sets to increase the revenue to be generated by the Nigerian government in order to maintain a high level of government spending. So how would you classify it? Would you say it is expansionary, or would you say it is contractionary?
No, this is certainly contractionary, because if you look at all the provisions, I'll say almost 90% of the provisions are either trying to take away incentives, which is also contractionary by itself, or they are introducing new taxes. I told you about the cryptocurrency tax. There's one on gaming and betting. There's investment allowance that companies get on their asset. Government is taking that away. There's rural investment allowance. Government is taking that away. Government is also saying, for hotels, they used to make certain exemptions for them if they earn foreign currency. They are removing that as well. They are imposing a 0.5% import duty levy on importation from outside Africa. They're also doing, some of the redefinition of building, for example, so that they can limit who can claim VAT. So all of these, when you put it together, is quite contractionary. Which means that if government is not careful, you may then slow down economic growth, and therefore you may have to deal with either a very slow and sluggish and fragile growth, or if you're unlucky, even a recession. So I have to also admit that there are a couple of provisions in the bill that are expansionary. For example, you have the ability to claim tax deduction for your life assurance. On your life, the life of your spouse or annuity, you claim a deduction for it when you buy those premium. And you also have investment tax credit for investment in gas infrastructure. So, maybe 2 or 3 of them like that are expansionary, but by and large, overall, this bill is contractionary.
All right, now we understand that finance bill aims to bring all the sectors of the economy into the tax net. Earlier on, I talked about the capital gains tax, even the undertakings, and of course the lottery and gaming businesses. How do you think these businesses will react to this new bill, having to have them being taxed? Or is it more of a statutory obligation to the government, or a rip-off of governments, or governments that even some people have considered not being accountable? How do you see how it will play out?
The various sectors are already reacting, and the reactions are not positive. I do understand that generally, if you want to tax anyone, their reaction are mostly predictable. But there's the bit of it that you have to pay attention to. When you have investors telling you that this is not going to work for XYZ reason, you need to listen to them. In fact, in the process of developing policies and drafting the bill, I think there should have been more engagement and consultation with these sectors. One of the finance directors of one of the largest investors in the oil and gas sector in Nigeria, called me after the bill was published by the National Assembly to say, what on earth is the Nigerian government thinking about to increase the income tax rate from 30% to 50% at a time that we're looking for investment and investors are not coming, and we have just passed the Petroleum Industry Act, nearly 1 year, and we haven't implemented it. And one of the major objectives of that act, which took us about 20 years to enact, is to create some certainties for investors so they can invest. These sectors take a very long period for you to recoup your investment. So I can't even plan for 2 years. We are changing the rates already. Why should I bring my money your way? We've seen what Russia is doing to Ukraine and Europe, looking for alternative sources of energy, including gas. But Nigeria is not being strategic in terms of our approach. We're also doing the wrong things to discourage investors from coming here to invest. Some of these issues really require that you do very elaborate consultation, use information and data for analysis. It's not enough to sign, commitment to net zero by 2060, and you're just looking for ways to tick a box to say that commitment that we signed up to, we're already amending the laws to do that. You have to look at what is the overall interest of your economy, both short, medium, and more importantly, on a long-term basis.
Finally, Taiwo, before I let you go, we understand that if investors are scared of bringing their investments into the country because, of course, if they do not have enough dividends or profits to make of their businesses, they go away. And that would also, in a way, inadvertently affect the job creation drive of the Nigerian government. And the Nigerian government is saying, looking at the new proposals contained in this finance bill, it is hoping to improve the indices in terms of job creation and reduce the unemployment rate in the country. So how do you think what is contained in this bill will translate into job creation? Are they being realistic with these demands? Because it seems as though they have an opposing mien to what they are proposing in the bill.
Yes, it's always very nice to see all those nice things, job creation, economic growth. But to be honest, investors don't care about those things that you say. They care about what you do actually. When you look at the details of the bill, there seems to be more uncertainties and things that discourage or cause for concern for investors, not only foreign investors, but even domestic investors. So if government says we are trying to create employment, create job and economic growth, and then impose what I'll call an arbitrary high rate of tax for gas flaring without really engaging the sector, or you say you're going to tax any import from outside of Africa, so you can pay your subscription to different multilateral agencies. All countries in the world are paying these things, and they don't have to impose special taxes to be able to do that. We talk about capital gains tax on shares. And I know a foreign investor who brought in dollars about 10 years ago, bought shares in the Nigerian capital market, and they sold early this year. And on paper, based on Naira value, they said they had made a gain, when indeed the amount they are getting in dollar terms is about half of what they brought in. So if you don't make reforms to address these issues, you can tell people you want to promote investment, you want to create employment, and they would not drop $1 or 1 Naira, because the policy is not about what you say or what you intend to do, it's actually what you carry out and execute on a day-to-day basis.
Well, it's all about realistic intent there. Thank you so much, Taiwo Oyedele. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, the Finance Bill 2022 represents and contains the final draft of what recommendations set to be made after regional consultations. And according to the Finance Minister, Zainab Ahmed, this bill is more people-centric and will achieve more in terms of effective governance, revenue and dividends to be delivered to the citizens. So now that is undergoing the legislative scrutiny, we got to see if the lawmakers will be able to point out those black spots and see what areas are implementable realistically, in realistic terms, and what needs to be properly amended, because what is important is to see a growing and a viable, booming economy. And when you have these shortfalls here and there, even as Taiwo has pointed out, then that could be a big problem. Now let's go for a short break, and when we return, we'll bring you international business news.